A good cliffhanger makes readers unable to put your book down. A bad one just annoys them. I'm Sarah Hoffman, founder of Inimitable Books, and today I'm going to be talking about how to write cliffhangers that create genuine tension and not pure manipulation. Cliffhangers work because they create a question readers desperately want answered. It raises stakes that readers care about, or it can shift a reader's perspective in a way that makes them rethink everything they've read up until that point. They're about the psychological tension of needing more answers, not just stopping at a convenient moment. They work in every genre and they need to be used strategically. You want to create a small question with every chapter so readers will continue your book, but the cliffhangers I'm discussing in today's video are the big ones, and if you use them too often, it will become repetitive and mess up the pacing of your book, which I talked about in our last video on this channel. A cliffhanger works best when it creates a gap between what the readers know and what they need to know. And that gap creates curiosity and tension and demands resolution, which requires them to keep. There are 3 elements to an effective cliffhanger. First, readers need to care about what's at stake. If they don't, then they don't care to hear the answer to the question. They might not even ask a question because they just don't care. You can't create a cliffhanger in chapter 2 with the character we just met and don't yet care about. You have to build investment first, and then you can have effective cliffhangers later. Second, the question needs to be specific and compelling. What will happen next is not a cliffhanger. It's built into every aspect of your story, or at least it should be. Specificity matters. Third, you need the possible answers to the question you are creating with your cliffhanger to be interesting. If the answer is obvious, then it's not a cliffhanger. That's less interesting than one that has multiple viable possibilities. The rest of your story makes that choice obvious in hindsight. But you need uncertainty to create tension. Your cliffhanger should fit the genre and tone of your story. Timing also matters. Early cliffhangers should hook readers into the story, but like I mentioned before, you don't want to do it too early before readers care about your characters. Cliffhangers in the middle of your book should deepen mystery and raise stakes, although every cliffhanger should raise the stakes in my opinion. And cliffhangers that are later in the story should create urgency towards the climax because you are pushing towards that high point. You shouldn't have a cliffhanger at the end of the book unless you're writing a series, because otherwise it's going to feel incomplete to readers. Unless your book is in a continuous series like my Stellar Blood trilogy, then your main arc needs to have resolution. Even if your book is in a series, each book needs to have a resolution, even if the larger arc of the series is still ongoing. The most basic cliffhanger is a question that readers need answered. In Down the Well, there are multiple cliffhangers. There's one where she falls down the well, earning the book its name. The shadow said nothing, just winked a golden eye, and with the strength of 10 men, pulled Lore down the well. To create a compelling question in your cliffhanger, make sure readers care about the characters who are involved, establish what's at stake before the cliffhanger. Readers who are going into the story blind don't know that the well is magical and she's going to end up in another world. Even readers who have read the book description don't know what is actually going to happen when she's there, so it kicks off the rest of the book. You need to connect the question to the larger story or themes in your book. And some of the best cliffhangers happen when information or perspective suddenly shifts, making us see everything differently. A pivot cliffhanger recontextualizes what we thought we knew. This type of cliffhanger is very tightly tied to plot twists, which I will be discussing in our next video, so be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss that one when it comes out. Now, I can't give away any of these types of cliffhangers from Inimitable Books titles, but in my debut novel, The Belgrave Legacy, I have multiple cliffhangers throughout the story. For chapters and also sections, each section is more or less one act of the 3-act structure. One leads into the next, and I raise the stakes each time with the help of cliffhanger. Whatever pivot you have in a cliffhanger requires setup. You need to establish the original understanding clearly so that when you reveal that it was wrong, you're not thinking, well, why didn't we think that before? You also need to plant hints that the initial assumption is wrong, but without being too obvious. And then you need to deliver the pivot at the midpoint to reframe the first half of the book Or you could do it at the end of Act 2 to force the protagonist to change their approach going into the third and final act of your story. There's the interruption cliffhanger. When something happens right as we're about to get information, or see a crucial moment resolve. Now, an example of this that I hate is when a mentor in a story, normally a fantasy, says, "I have something to tell you," and then dies before they can, even though they had time to say what they wanted to. But if you've ever seen a romance when characters are interrupted right before they're about to kiss, or a mystery when someone is interrupted right before discovering an important clue, then you know how this works. Some effective interruptions are when the interruption itself is significant and not just a distraction from the important thing, when the interruption is creating new complications or questions and not merely delaying the inevitable. Ineffective interruptions are when you are stopping just to stop. You're doing it because you want to use that M dash, not because you've actually planned your story around this. If you make your readers wait for multiple chapters for payoff and no justification, it will feel as if you dropped this story thread and forgot about it, which readers will assume is a mistake and bad writing rather than something intentional on your part. If the characters could easily return to the topic but mysteriously don't just because your plot demands it, that's also not a good reason to have this type of interruption. The interrupted moment needs to tell us something even if it doesn't finish what it was saying. It needs to have readers guessing what the end of that sentence was. And the interruption needs to say something about the story or the characters so that readers aren't so frustrated that they stop reading. Don't just stop what you were doing and then move on to the next thing. You need to make both what is being stopped and what is stopping it meaningful. Then we have the reveal cliffhanger. This one answers a question, but raises a bigger one. In Thanks for Watching, characters are invited on a brand trip where not everything is as it seems. The book description ends with the sentence, "As the backstabbing turns literal and more influencers die in awful, strange ways, the dwindling group can no longer deny the obvious. Someone gathered them there to die." And I'm not going to say how this discovery happens, but when it happens, it is huge. So this type of cliffhanger has a yes but structure. In Thanks for Watching, they learn that they were brought to the island under false circumstances, but they have no idea why or who's behind everything. The reveal cliffhanger satisfies readers with an immediate question that might have been on their mind for a few chapters or many chapters, but then it deepens the larger mystery of your story, even if that mystery at its core is the simple what happens next. But that can't be the only question that the cliffhanger is posing. This type of structure is going to prevent exhaustion from constant unresolved tension. Readers get answers, which feels satisfying, but then need more information. The new question is always going to be more intense, more interesting, and build on the previous information that you have revealed. And these types of reveals build trust with your audience by showing readers that you eventually deliver on your promises. I mentioned in the previous video that you should not be ending every chapter on a cliffhanger. But when you do it, make sure that you have a quieter moment planned nearby so that readers don't get exhausted in your pacing. Now, I've been talking about different types of cliffhangers, and technically they can all be adapted to a different level of intensity, although some lend themselves better to high versus low. Let's talk about when you should be using each intensity rather than each type. So for a high stakes cliffhanger, you need to use them at key moments, but you don't want to use them all the time. Medium tension cliffhangers for chapter endings where you have questions that are raised, but they're not necessarily huge because, as I said, each time you use that type of cliffhanger, the next question actually needs to be more intense. So if you use that type of cliffhanger early in your story, then the stakes aren't going to be super high right off the bat, but they will get more so the later you get into the type of cliffhanger you are using at any moment should match where you are in the story. Again, early cliffhangers need to be about building interest in what is happening, but as you get on, things need to intensify, and then at the end, you need to add extra urgency, not just interest. Here are mistakes that I often see when it comes to cliffhangers. The false cliffhanger that doesn't deliver. You can subvert expectations once or twice, but beyond that, you really need to match the cliffhanger's promise. You don't want to overuse them so that readers get numb. If every chapter ends with someone's life in danger, readers will tune out. You need small aspects of cliffhangers to keep readers going, but if you're always doing the big dramatic moments that I've been talking about throughout this video, it's going to mess up a reader's experience, and you don't want that. You also don't want to stop mid-sentence or mid-action just for the sake of it. I talked about it earlier. There needs to be a reason, and that reason is to generate more interest, tension, and intrigue. Making readers wait too long for payoff. If you create a cliffhanger and then switch to a different point of view or a different subplot without acknowledging the cliffhanger at all for 3 or more chapters, readers are going to get frustrated. Using cliffhangers that don't fit your genre or tone. Creating cliffhangers through character stupidity. You don't want character stupidity to drive your story. If something can be resolved quickly, it's not a real obstacle, and therefore there's no challenge in it. So if your cliffhanger is due to your character making an obviously dumb decision, then your reader is going to be annoyed and not care about the rest of the book. And lastly, creating cliffhangers that feel like manipulation rather than organic story development. If readers can tell that you're jerking them around just to keep them reading, they're going to resent you. Cliffhanger should feel like a natural consequence of your story, if maybe a little artificial nudge to get them to keep going, but nothing so obvious or fake that it ruins them being immersed in your story. If you have cliffhangers in your own book or are planning to write some, identify what type of cliffhanger you're using. Look for patterns. Are you using the same type repeatedly? Are you using them too close together or too far apart? Then for each cliffhanger, ask, have I established why this matters? Do readers care about these characters and stakes? Is the question specific and compelling? Are all possible answers to the question interesting? Check for your payoff. For each cliffhanger, how long does it take to get resolved? If it's more than 3 chapters, make sure the wait feels worth it. And then make sure you're giving your readers breathing room. If this video helped you at all, the Inimitable Writing Community's Query Ready course comes with a 72-page worksheet that includes exercises to check and fix the pacing in your book. It doesn't explicitly talk about cliffhangers, but cliffhangers are a great tool when pacing your novel. You'll learn how to create tension that feels organic and not manipulative, and how to keep readers engaged throughout your entire manuscript. Membership also includes Q&As with me, where you can ask specific questions about your own books, not just general publishing questions. Link is in the description down below. And be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next installment of this playlist. I'll be talking about plot twists that surprise without cheating your reader, because now that you understand cliffhangers, let's talk about how to deliver on them in ways that feel satisfying. Let me know in the comments what your favorite cliffhanger is that you've read, and talk a little bit about what made it effective. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.